Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's story. He pretended to be poor and learned what wealth really meant. The rain had just started to fall over New York City, painting silver trails on the glass of a small downtown cafe. Inside, soft jazz played under the low hum of conversation. At a corner table, Lucas Grant sat alone, his expensive suit replaced by a simple gray hoodie and worn jeans. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another tired man trying to escape the storm. In truth, he was one of the city's youngest billionaires, the CEO of Grant Holdings, and tonight, he was about to make the strangest decision of his life. Across the room, a waitress moved quickly between tables, balancing trays and apologizing to customers with a shy smile. Her name was Elena Rivera, 27, hardworking, and barely making rent each month. Lucas had seen her before, once when his car broke down and she offered him a cup of coffee for free, thinking he was a struggling mechanic. She never knew who he really was. And maybe that was what drew him back here tonight. He watched her laugh with an older couple at table 5, her hair falling loose as she brushed it behind her ear. Something about her honesty, her unpolished kindness, cut through the noise of his world. He had everything: power, wealth, control, but he felt nothing. Until now. When the cafe grew quiet, he stood up and waited near the counter as she wiped down the tables. "You are closing soon?" he asked gently. She looked up, startled. "In 15 minutes. Can I get you anything?" He hesitated before saying, "A conversation." She frowned, uncertain if he was joking, but something in his eyes stopped her from walking away. "About what?" she asked. He drew a folded paper from his pocket, rain still glistening on its edge. "About a contract," he said. Her brows furrowed. "A contract?" "Yes," he continued, voice calm but urgent. "Marry me. For 6 months. No strings, no romance, just a deal." For a second, the room went silent except for the rain against the window. She blinked in disbelief. "I am sorry, what?" Lucas met her gaze steadily. "You need help." "I need a wife. It is a long story, but I will pay off your debts, your mother's hospital bills, everything. In return, you agree to be Mrs. Grant in paper only." She stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "Is this some kind of prank?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It is the most serious offer I have ever made." Her laugh was soft, nervous. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You are honest, you keep your word, and you treat strangers with kindness. That is more than I can say for half the people in my world." The lights flickered from the storm outside. Elena looked down at her hands, her breath shallow. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you are the only person who ever looked at me without seeing money," he answered. The wind howled through the street, and thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. She studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. "You are crazy," she murmured. "Probably," he replied, a faint smile breaking through. "But sometimes, crazy is what saves us." And as the cafe lights dimmed, Elena realized she was standing at the edge of a choice that could change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining like mirrors under a pale winter sun. Elena barely slept. The stranger's words from the night before echoed in her mind: "Marry me. It is just a contract." She had replayed the conversation again and again, half convinced it had been a dream. But when she opened her worn purse, the folded piece of paper he had left behind was still there. Inside was a business card: Lucas Grant, Grant Holdings. The name looked familiar. She had seen it once on a billboard downtown, but she had never connected it to the quiet man in the cafe. Now her heart raced. Could it really be him? She tried to shake off the thought and went about her morning, but everything felt unreal. By noon, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Miss Rivera? The voice was calm, deep. This is Lucas. Have you thought about my offer? She swallowed hard. I thought it was a joke. It was not, he replied. I will meet you at the hospital this afternoon. You can see that I mean what I said. Her pulse quickened. How do you even know where my mother is? You told me last night, he said softly. You were worried about the surgery bill. She froze. He had listened. Hours later, she stood in the hospital hallway, watching as Lucas spoke to the billing department. He looked different now, no hoodie, no jeans, just a clean gray suit that fit him perfectly. In his hand was a file with hospital forms. When he finished, he turned toward her. It is taken care of, he said simply. You did not have to do that, she whispered. Yes, I did, he answered. You needed help. I needed a partner. This makes us even. He handed her a sleek envelope. Inside was the contract. 6 months, he said. We present ourselves as husband and wife. In public, we appear united. In private, nothing changes. You will have your own space, your own freedom. When it ends, you walk away free and clear. She stared at the pages, her hands trembling slightly. This is insane. It is logical, he said. You have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Except my sanity, she murmured. He smiled faintly. You might be surprised. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her mother's room was just down the hall, the soft beeping of machines faint behind the door. Elena thought of the overdue bills, the eviction notice, the exhaustion of trying to survive one more month. If I say yes, she asked quietly, when do we start? Lucas looked at his watch. Tomorrow. That night, she sat beside her mother's bed, watching the older woman sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. The medical bracelet gleamed softly under the fluorescent light. Elena took a deep breath, feeling both relief and fear. She whispered to herself, what am I doing? In his penthouse across the city, Lucas stood by the window, staring out at the skyline. His reflection looked back at him, tired but determined. For years, his family's board had demanded he marry to secure the company's legacy. Every woman he met saw only the name, the power, the money. But not Elena. She had looked at him like he was human. Maybe that was why he had chosen her. Maybe that was why, for the first time in years, he felt something like hope. The city lights flickered below, and he closed his eyes for a moment. 6 months, he whispered. That is all it takes. What neither of them knew was that 6 months would change everything. The next day came too quickly. At 9 in the morning, Elena stood outside the grand glass tower that bore his name, Grant Holdings. Her heart raced as the revolving doors reflected her anxious face. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, gold accents, the steady rhythm of heels against polished stone. She felt like an imposter in her simple beige dress, clutching the same purse she had used for years. The receptionist looked up with polite surprise. Miss Rivera? Mr. Grant is expecting you. Those words still sounded unreal. When the elevator opened to the top floor, the doors revealed an entirely different world, quiet, sleek, filled with light and the faint scent of cedar and coffee. Lucas stood by his desk, looking out the window at the skyline. He turned as she entered, expression unreadable but not unkind. You came, he said. I said I would, she replied, trying to sound steady. He nodded toward the table where a stack of papers waited. That is the final contract. Once you sign, everything begins. She approached slowly, scanning the clauses. Each page was typed in precise legal language. She read the key rules aloud. Rule 1: No emotional attachment. Rule 2. Appear at all social events as a married couple. Rule 3. Respect privacy. Rule 4. The agreement will terminate automatically after 6 months. She looked up. You really thought of everything. That is my job, he said simply. To prepare for every outcome. He handed her a pen, heavy and silver, engraved with his initials. Once you sign, you will move into the penthouse tomorrow. My assistant will help you settle in. Her breath caught. You expect me to live with you? It would look suspicious otherwise, he said. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives. Just proximity. Elena hesitated, then took the pen. The sound of the nib scratching the paper felt louder than the hum of the city below. When she handed it back, Lucas offered his hand. Welcome to the contract, Mrs. Grant. She shook it, her palm cold against his. It still feels strange, she murmured. It should, he replied. Reality usually does. That evening, a black car drove her to his residence, an entire floor of glass and steel overlooking the city. It was breathtaking but silent, almost sterile. A housekeeper guided her to a guest suite decorated in muted tones. On the nightstand was a note in his neat handwriting, breakfast at 7. Formal fitting at 9. First public appearance Friday night. She stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Across the hall, Lucas loosened his tie and sat on the edge of his bed. For years he had faced boardrooms, mergers, and billion-dollar deals without blinking. Yet this arrangement unsettled him more than any negotiation. He had told himself it was just business, a practical solution. But watching Elena's hesitant courage, he knew there was more at stake. The following morning, she joined him for breakfast at a long oak table overlooking the skyline. He sipped black coffee while she barely touched her toast. You do not have to be nervous, he said quietly. It is just another performance. For you maybe, she replied. For me, it is an entirely new world. He studied her, then smiled faintly. Then let us take it one day at a time. That afternoon, his stylist arrived with racks of elegant dresses. Elena tried on gown after gown, each one more expensive than anything she had ever touched. When she stepped out in a midnight blue evening dress, Lucas looked up from his phone. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. That one, he said softly. Why, she asked, blushing under his gaze. Because you look like you belong, he answered. For the first time, she believed he might be right. By Friday night, everything was in motion. The car rolled to a stop outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, where a sea of flashing lights and camera shutters filled the cold air. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her small clutch purse. Lucas noticed and leaned closer. Remember the rules, he murmured. Smile, stand by my side, and let me handle the rest. She nodded, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. As the door opened, a wave of sound hit them, reporters shouting questions, people calling Lucas's name. The cameras turned instantly toward her, curious about the mysterious woman on his arm. Lucas offered his hand. Ready, he asked. She took it. Not even close. He smiled faintly. Perfect. They stepped out together, the lights almost blinding. Lucas placed a steadying hand on her back, guiding her through the crowd. Mr. Grant, who is she? Someone yelled. Is this your wife? Another voice called. Lucas paused just long enough to say, yes. Meet Mrs. Grant. The murmur grew into a roar. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered above a crowd of executives, investors, and reporters. Every step echoed like a test. Elena followed Lucas's lead, her posture graceful but tense. When they reached the table reserved for the board, one of the older men stood with a polite but sharp smile. So this is your wife, he said, offering his hand to Elena. We were starting to think she was imaginary. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly, but Elena smiled and shook his hand. Imaginary women do not pay hospital bills, she replied softly. The table went quiet for a beat before laughter broke the tension. Even Lucas's lips twitched into a small, proud grin. As the evening went on, Elena's natural warmth began to draw people in. She listened intently, asked kind questions, and laughed at the right moments. For the first time, Lucas saw how effortlessly she balanced grace and honesty. When a young intern spilled a glass of wine near her, Elena quickly grabbed napkins and helped clean up, waving off the staff's apologies. "Accidents happen," she said with a smile. "No harm done." The moment was small, but it spread across the room like a whisper. Mrs. Grant, the elegant woman who stayed humble. Later that night, Lucas found her standing alone on the balcony, the city lights glowing beneath them. "You did well," he said quietly. "You made them forget it was all an act." She turned to him, her breath visible in the cool air. "I was not acting," she said. "At least, not all the time." He studied her face, the way her eyes reflected the skyline. "You handled yourself with dignity," he said. "My mother would have liked you." That caught her off guard. "You never talk about her." "There is not much to say," he replied, voice low. "She died before she could see what I built. I thought success would fill that silence, but it never did." Elena looked down, then spoke softly. "Maybe because success is loud, but grief is quiet." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt smaller, the contract less important. The orchestra inside began to play a slow song. Lucas offered his hand again. "One dance?" She hesitated, then smiled. "We did not put that in the contract." "Then let us call it a loophole." As they danced under the soft lights, something shifted, small but undeniable. Lucas felt the armor he had built begin to crack, and Elena realized that behind his careful composure was a man who had forgotten how to be seen. When the music ended, they stepped apart, but the space between them felt charged. Lucas whispered, "You surprised me tonight." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Maybe that is what you needed." Outside, snow began to fall over the city, silent and endless, like the start of something they both could not yet name. The following week came with a storm of attention. Every magazine and gossip column had a headline about the mysterious Mrs. Grant. Photos from the gala filled the internet, and Elena's quiet life was gone overnight. In the penthouse, she stood by the window, scrolling through comments that ranged from admiration to cruel suspicion. "They think I married you for money," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas, seated at his desk, did not look up from the reports he was reviewing. "Let them think whatever they want," he replied evenly. "It will fade." "It is easy for you to say," she answered. "You have always been the one with control." Lucas finally looked at her, his gaze calm but unreadable. "Control is an illusion," he said. "The world can turn on you in a single headline." His words carried a weight that silenced her. He stood and walked over to the window beside her. "Elena, you are handling this better than most. The board is already warming up to you. They trust what they see." "Do they?" she asked softly. "Or do they just believe the picture we painted?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. It was his assistant, reminding him of the upcoming board meeting. He exhaled. "We will find out soon enough." Later that afternoon, Elena sat in the front row of the conference room, her palms damp. The room was filled with executives in sharp suits, each watching her with the polite scrutiny of the wealthy. Lucas entered, greeting them with his usual calm authority. "Before we begin," one of the older board members said, "I think we should acknowledge the recent developments." His eyes flicked toward Elena. "Some of our partners are concerned. They want to ensure your marriage does not affect your leadership." Lucas smiled faintly. "If anything, it has improved it," he said. "Mrs. Grant brings perspective." Elena could feel every eye turn toward her. "Perhaps she would like to say a few words," another member suggested. Lucas's gaze met hers, steady, reassuring. She stood slowly, heart pounding. I am not here to interfere, she began. But I have seen how hard Mr. Grant works for this company. What you call a distraction has given him balance, and that makes him stronger. For a moment, the room was silent. Then one of the women on the board smiled. Spoken like a real partner. The tension eased. After the meeting, Lucas stopped her in the hallway. You handled that perfectly, he said. You did not have to defend me, she replied. Yes, I did, he said softly. Because you defended the truth. That evening, they shared dinner in the quiet of the penthouse. For once, it did not feel like an arrangement but something real. Elena looked across the table. You never told me what you get out of all this, besides saving your company. Lucas hesitated, then said, peace. For a while, at least. Peace, she asked, tilting her head. You think marrying a stranger brings peace? He gave a small, tired smile. It reminds me there are still people who act out of kindness. She set down her fork. And what happens when 6 months are over? Then we go back to who we were, he said. But the words did not sound convincing. That night, Elena stood on the balcony, watching snow drift past the city lights. Lucas joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. It is beautiful tonight, she said quietly. It is, he agreed. But it looks different depending on where you stand. She turned to him. You talk like a man who is lonely in a crowd. He met her gaze. Maybe I am. A silence fell between them, deep and fragile. The contract still existed, written in ink, but something stronger had begun to take its place, something neither of them dared to name yet. As the wind whispered through the city below, Elena realized she was no longer pretending. And for the first time, Lucas wondered if the woman he had chosen to play his wife might be the only person who ever saw the man behind the mask. Winter began to thaw, and with it, the line between truth and pretense blurred. It had been 2 months since Elena signed the contract, yet every day in the Grant penthouse felt less like a performance and more like a rhythm they had built together. Mornings began with quiet coffee, evenings ended with shared silence over city lights, but something unspoken hovered between them, something neither dared to name. One morning, Lucas found Elena in the library, curled up on the couch with a book. The sunlight caught her hair, turning it gold against the soft cream of the furniture. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. You look peaceful. She glanced up, smiling faintly. Books are cheaper than therapy. He chuckled softly. That depends on what you are trying to heal. She studied him for a second. You sound like a man who has tried both. He did not deny it. I have tried everything except honesty, he admitted quietly. The air shifted. Before she could respond, his phone rang. His expression hardened as he answered. Grant, he said briskly. The voice on the other end was sharp and urgent. We have a problem. The investors from Tokyo are pulling out unless they meet your wife in person. Lucas's eyes flicked toward Elena. Set up a dinner, he replied. We will be there. When he hung up, she raised an eyebrow. Another test? Another performance, he said. But this time, it matters. The following evening, the restaurant gleamed with candlelight and polished silver. Elena arrived in a soft emerald dress, simple but elegant. The investors stood as they entered, and she smiled, her composure calm. Throughout dinner, she listened carefully, occasionally translating an idiom or softening a harsh business phrase. Her warmth disarmed the men who had arrived skeptical and left impressed. When it was over, one of them said, Your wife is the reason we trust you, Mr. Grant. Lucas looked at her with something close to wonder. So do I, he said quietly. In the car afterward, she looked out the window at the passing lights. You did not need me to convince them, she said. They already respected you. They respected the man I pretend to be, he replied. You made them see the man I could be. The next day, Lucas invited her to his private retreat outside the city. It was the first time he had opened that part of his life to anyone. The cabin sat near a frozen lake, surrounded by evergreens and silence. "I come here when I need to remember who I am," he said as they stepped inside. The fire crackled to life, painting the room in amber light. "And who is that?" she asked. "A man who forgot what peace feels like." She looked around at the worn books, the sketches pinned to the wall, the guitar resting by the window. "You play?" "Not well," he admitted. "My mother taught me when I was young. After she died, I stopped." She nodded gently. "Maybe it is time to start again." He picked up the guitar, hesitant, and strummed a few soft notes. The sound filled the cabin, imperfect, human, real. Elena smiled. "See? Not bad for someone who stopped trying." Lucas glanced at her, a quiet laugh escaping his chest. "You are dangerous," he said. "You make me believe in things again." "And is that a bad thing?" she asked. "It depends on how real we let it become," he replied. The night deepened. Snow began to fall outside, thick and silent. She stood near the fire, her shadow dancing on the wall, while he watched her with the uneasy awareness that the contract had already failed to contain what was happening between them. For the first time in years, Lucas Grant did not feel like a man pretending. He felt alive. And that terrified him more than any deal ever had. The snow melted into spring, but peace did not last. One morning, Lucas entered his office to find chaos. Headlines covered his desk, photos of him and Elena at the cabin, the words, "contract marriage scandal," printed in bold. Someone had leaked everything. His board was furious, the investors shaken. By noon, reporters camped outside the building, demanding answers. When Lucas called Elena, her voice trembled. "I saw it," she said. "Is it true what they are saying?" "No," he replied firmly. "But the truth will not matter if we do not control this." "Control?" she repeated. "Lucas, they think I used you for money." He exhaled. "Let me handle it." "You cannot fix everything with money or statements," she said quietly. "Sometimes you just have to tell the truth." That night, she waited in the penthouse while the city below buzzed with rumors. When Lucas finally returned, his expression was unreadable. "Who did this?" she asked. "A member of the board," he answered. "Someone who wants me out." She crossed her arms. "And they are using me to do it." He nodded once. "Yes." The air felt heavy. "You told me to pretend," she said. "But I never pretended to care. Now everyone thinks I am a liar." "You are not," he said sharply. "I know that." "Then why did you not defend me?" she asked, her voice breaking. He froze. The truth was simple but unbearable. Had stayed silent to protect the company, not her. "Because I thought it would pass," he admitted. "I was wrong." Tears welled in her eyes. "I gave you my trust, and you traded it for silence." She turned away, grabbing her coat. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Somewhere I can remember who I was before all this," she said. "Before I became a name in your headlines." She left, the elevator doors closing on the stunned silence he could not escape. Days turned into weeks. The penthouse felt colder without her. Every morning, Lucas looked at the empty chair across the table and thought of the words she had said. "Sometimes you just have to tell the truth." The scandal deepened until the board demanded his resignation. He handed it over without protest. That night, he walked through the empty halls of Grant Holdings one last time. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to prove and no one to lie to. Standing by the window, he whispered to himself, "You were right, Elena. Wealth means nothing if it costs your soul." Somewhere across the city, she sat in a small cafe, the same one where it had all begun, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. Despite everything, part of her still hoped he would walk through that door again, not as the man who offered her a contract, but as the man who finally learned how to love without terms. 2 weeks later, the world finally grew tired of the scandal, but the damage had already been done. Lucas Grant had disappeared from the headlines, from the company, and from the life he once controlled. His empire survived, but without him. He spent those days in silence, away from the city, trying to understand what wealth truly meant when there was no one left to share it with. Then, one evening, he made a decision. He would not let the story end in lies. The next morning, Lucas appeared at a press conference held in the same ballroom where he and Elena had once danced. The cameras flashed, the crowd buzzed, but his voice was calm and steady. "You have read the rumors," he began. "Some of them are true, but not in the way you think. I did offer Elena Rivera a contract marriage. That part is real. What the papers will never tell you is that she was the only person who treated me like a man, not a fortune. She did not deceive me. I deceived her. And for that, I owe her the truth." Reporters shouted questions, but he continued. "I am resigning from Grant Holdings permanently. I have transferred my shares to a charitable foundation in her name, the Rivera Foundation, to support patients who cannot afford treatment. Because she reminded me that kindness is the only real currency worth spending." Cameras clicked furiously as he stepped away from the podium. There was no applause, just stunned silence. Later that night, Elena saw the broadcast replayed on the small television in her apartment. Her hands covered her mouth as tears blurred her vision. He had done it not for image, not for redemption, but for her. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, Lucas stood there in the same gray hoodie he had worn the day they met. No suit, no entourage, just him. "You should not be here," she said softly. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I needed to see you." She looked at him, her emotions tangled between anger and relief. "You told the whole world the truth. Because you deserved it," he said. "I thought I was protecting you by staying silent, but I was only protecting my pride." "And what now?" she asked, her voice trembling. He took a breath. "Now, I start over. Without the company, without the mask. I want to learn what real wealth means." She hesitated, studying his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something honest, almost fragile. "You did not have to give away everything," she whispered. "I already lost the only thing that mattered," he said quietly. "You." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the city below. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "You always understood, Lucas. You just needed to stop pretending." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, for the first time in months, they both smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally set them free. Spring melted into early summer, and life slowly found its rhythm again. The city had moved on to new stories, new scandals, and Lucas Grant had become a quiet name in the background. The Rivera Foundation opened its first clinic that month, a modest building painted in white and gold, offering free care to families who could not afford it. Elena stood at the entrance, surrounded by volunteers, the sun catching the edges of her hair. She had not seen Lucas since the night he came to her door. But she thought of him often, his words, his silence, and the truth he had finally spoken. When the ribbon-cutting ceremony ended, she turned to find him standing among the crowd. No cameras, no reporters, just him, holding a small white envelope. "You came," she said softly. "I told myself I would only watch from a distance," he replied. "But I wanted to see what you built." She smiled faintly. "What we built? It was your idea." "No," he said gently. "It was yours. I just had to lose everything to see it." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a single silver ring, the same one from their contract. "You kept it," she whispered. "I never could let it go," he said. "It started as a symbol of an agreement, but I want it to mean something real now. No terms, no signatures. Just love." She looked down at the ring, her hands trembling. Lucas, we are from two different worlds, she said. Not anymore, he replied. We both learned that wealth is not measured in what you own, but in what you give. And you gave me back my heart. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she did not hold them back. So what are you asking me? She whispered. He smiled softly. To let me try again. Not as your employer, not as the man who made a deal, but as the man who loves you. The air between them felt still, golden, suspended in a moment neither of them wanted to end. Slowly, she placed the ring back in his hand. You will have to earn it, she said, her voice steady but warm. Good, he replied, a small laugh escaping him. That means I still have a chance. Months later, on a quiet evening, the clinic held a gala to celebrate its success. Guests mingled, laughter filled the air, and at the center of the room stood a new exhibit, a framed photograph titled The Meaning of Wealth. It showed two hands clasped together, rain dripping from their sleeves, the city lights behind them. Elena looked at the photo and felt a familiar warmth. Lucas approached from behind, his voice gentle. Do you like it? It is beautiful, she said. It feels like a beginning. He nodded. Because it is. He reached into his pocket and revealed the same silver ring, this time engraved with two simple words, no contracts. She laughed softly as he slipped it onto her finger. Just love, she asked. Just love, he echoed. As the lights dimmed and music filled the room, the story that began as a contract ended as a promise. He had pretended to be poor, but in finding her, he had discovered the only wealth that truly mattered, a love that asked for nothing in return.